Every evening at 6 o'clock sharp, Rosa would pack her small backpack with homework and a worn paperback book. She knew the routine by heart. Her mother, Elena, would finish cooking dinner, change into her cleaning uniform, and together they would walk 15 minutes to the grand building that housed the Whitmore Conservatory of Music. Rosa was 8 years old, but she had been making this journey for 2 years now, ever since her father left, and Elena took the evening cleaning job to make ends meet. The conservatory paid well for night cleaning because they needed someone trustworthy around their expensive instruments and equipment. Elena was perfect for the job. She was careful, quiet, and had never broken so much as a pencil in her entire life. The conservatory building was like stepping into another world. The floors were polished marble that reflected the crystal chandeliers hanging from impossibly high ceilings. Oil paintings of famous composers lined the hallways, their stern faces watching over anyone who walked beneath them. The whole place smelled of wood polish and something Rosa couldn't quite name, but always made her feel calm. While Elena worked, Rosa had her own little routine. She would sit in the comfortable leather chair in the main lobby, doing her homework, under the warm glow of an antique lamp. The building was never completely empty. Students came and went until about 9 in the evening, practicing for recitals and lessons. Rosa would watch them carrying their instrument cases, always looking so serious and important. But what fascinated Rosa most were the practice rooms. These were small, soundproof rooms with glass doors, each containing a piano. Through these glass windows, Rosa could see into entire worlds of music. She watched teenage students struggle through difficult pieces, their faces scrunched in concentration. She saw older students play with such grace that their fingers seemed to dance across the keys. Sometimes advanced students would play pieces so beautiful that Rosa would stop doing her homework entirely and just listen. Rosa had developed a game with herself. She would try to guess what the music was feeling. When someone played slow, gentle pieces, she imagined the piano was telling a bedtime story. When the music was fast and energetic, she pictured the piano laughing and running around. When students played dramatic, powerful pieces, Rosa felt like the piano was giving an important speech to a crowd of people. She began to notice patterns. Certain finger positions created happy sounds. Other movements produced sad, longing melodies. Rosa started moving her own fingers along with what she saw, practicing the motions on her desk while the students played. She didn't even realize she was doing it at first. It just felt natural, like her hands wanted to copy what her eyes were seeing. Elena noticed her daughter's fascination, but didn't think much of it. Rosa had always been a dreamy child, getting lost in books and imagination. Elena figured the music was just another thing for Rosa to daydream about while she waited for the cleaning shift to end. One evening in late October, something unusual happened. Elena was in the administrative wing dealing with a broken water pipe that had flooded one of the offices. The building's maintenance supervisor had called her over because water was seeping under expensive filing cabinets. Elena knew this would take at least an hour to clean up properly. Rosa found herself completely alone in the main part of the building for the first time ever. The practice rooms were empty, their glass doors standing open like invitations. The hallways were silent except for the distant hum of heating vents and the occasional creak of the old building settling. Rosa abandoned her homework and began wandering the halls. She peeked into practice rooms, seeing music stands with sheet, music left behind by students. She touched the walls, feeling the vibrations that lingered from hours of music making. Everything felt magical and slightly forbidden. Then she found herself standing in the doorway of the grand recital hall. Rosa, had seen this room before, but only from the lobby through heavy glass doors that were always kept locked. Now, somehow, the doors were slightly open. Rosa pushed them wider and stepped inside. The room took her breath away. It was enormous, with rows and rows of red velvet seats facing a raised stage. The walls were decorated with intricate moldings, painted in gold. But dominating the stage was the most magnificent piano Rosa had ever seen. It was a glossy black grand piano that seemed to glow under the soft stage lights that had been left on. Rosa knew she shouldn't be in here. This was clearly a special room, not meant for 8-year-old girls whose mothers cleaned the building. But something about the piano called to her. She had watched so many students play instruments just like this one, but from a distance, through glass, like watching television. She walked slowly down the center aisle, her footsteps echoing in the empty space. The closer she got to the stage, the larger the piano seemed to become. When she reached the stage steps, Rosa paused. She looked around the empty hall, listening for any sound of her mother returning. Silence. Rosa climbed the 3 steps onto the stage. The piano bench was higher than she expected, and she had to boost herself up to sit properly. Her feet didn't quite reach the pedals, but that was okay. She wasn't even sure what pedals were for anyway. Rosa stared at the keys. There were so many of them, perfectly white with black keys scattered between them in a pattern she had memorized from watching. She knew that when you pressed them, beautiful sounds came out. She had seen it happen hundreds of times. Very gently, Rosa pressed one white key near the middle of the piano. The sound that came out was unlike anything she had ever heard. It wasn't the muffled, distant music she usually heard through glass doors. This was rich and full and seemed to fill her entire body. The note hung in the air for a long moment before fading away, leaving Rosa wanting to hear it again. She pressed another key, then another. Each note was like a surprise gift. Some were high and light like birds singing. Others were low and deep, like thunder rumbling far away. Rosa began pressing keys in sequences, not knowing she was playing scales that students spent months learning to master. Then something extraordinary happened. Rosa's hands seemed to remember the finger patterns. She had watched through those glass doors. Almost without thinking, she began playing a melody. The notes flowed together like a story being told. She wasn't reading music because Rosa couldn't read music. She was simply remembering, her fingers finding the right keys, as if they had always known where to go. The melody was Chopin's Minute Waltz, though Rosa didn't know the name of what she was playing. She only knew it was one of the pieces she had heard many times, played by the advanced students who came for evening lessons. Her hands moved across the keys with surprising confidence, finding the rhythm and emotion of the piece. As Rosa played, she felt something she had never experienced before. It was like her thoughts and feelings were flowing directly through her fingers into the piano, and the piano was transforming them into something beautiful that filled the entire hall. She understood now why students looked so focused when they played. This wasn't just pressing keys to make sounds. This was like having a conversation with the music itself. Rosa became so lost in the experience that she forgot where she was. She forgot about her homework waiting in the lobby. She forgot about her mother cleaning up water damage in the administrative wing. She forgot that she was an 8-year-old girl who had never had a music lesson in her life. All that existed was Rosa, the piano, and the beautiful sounds they were creating together. For those precious minutes, Rosa discovered a part of herself she never knew existed. Her hands moved with grace and purpose, bringing to life the melodies that had been growing in her heart for 2 years of watching and listening. The music filled The empty hall, echoing off the walls and ceiling, as if the building itself was celebrating this moment of pure, unexpected magic. Dr. Benjamin Harrison had been the director of Whitmore Conservatory for 15 years, but tonight he felt like a tired old man. The monthly board meeting had run 3 hours longer than expected, and he had forgotten his briefcase with tomorrow's important documents. At 62 years old, these late evening trips back to the office were becoming harder on his knees and his patience. He parked his car in the nearly empty parking lot and noticed Elena's beat-up Honda Civic still there. Good, he thought. At least the building would be unlocked, and he wouldn't have to fumble with his keys in the dark. Elena was one of their best cleaning staff members. She was thorough, careful, and never complained about the long hours or difficult work. Dr. Harrison entered through the main entrance, expecting to find the building quiet, except for the hum of cleaning equipment. Instead, he heard something that made him stop in his tracks. Music was coming from somewhere deep inside the building. Beautiful, flowing piano music. His first thought was annoyance. Students were strictly forbidden from using the instruments after 9 p.m. The insurance policy was very clear about supervised practice times. Someone was breaking a serious rule, and Dr. Harrison was not in the mood to deal with rebellious teenagers tonight. But as he walked closer to the source of the music, his annoyance began to fade into confusion. The piece being played was incredibly complex. This wasn't some student plunking through scales or stumbling through a beginner's songbook. This was advanced classical piano, played with remarkable skill and emotional depth. The music was coming from the grand recital hall. Dr. Harrison approached the heavy doors, which were slightly ajar, allowing the beautiful melody to spill into the hallway. He recognized the piece now, Chopin's Minute Waltz, but it was being played with an interpretation that was both technically perfect and surprisingly mature. Dr. Harrison pushed the door open just wide enough to peer inside, expecting to see one of his most advanced students, perhaps someone preparing for an important audition or competition. What he saw instead made him question whether he was dreaming. A small girl, probably no more than 8 or 9 years old, was seated at the magnificent Steinway grand piano. She was wearing simple clothes, a faded purple sweater and jeans with patches on the knees. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail with a rubber band that had seen better days. Her feet didn't even reach the pedals, but her hands moved across the keys with extraordinary grace and confidence. Dr. Harrison felt his breath catch in his throat. In 30 years of professional music education, he had heard thousands of students play. He had taught prodigies, worked with concert pianists, and discovered remarkable talents. But what he was witnessing now was something beyond anything in his experience. The child wasn't reading sheet music. There was no music stand in front of her, no teacher guiding her hands. She was playing entirely from memory, and not just playing. She was interpreting the piece with a maturity that typically took decades to develop. Her phrasing was subtle and sophisticated. She understood the emotional landscape of the music in a way that suggested years of study and experience. Dr. Harrison stood frozen in the doorway, afraid that any movement might break the spell. The girl transitioned seamlessly from the Chopin into Mozart's Piano Sonata No. 11, her small hands navigating the complex passages with ease. Then, without pause, she moved into the opening measures of Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata, playing the haunting melody with such deep feeling that Dr. Harrison felt tears forming in his eyes. This was impossible. Children didn't just sit down and play classical masterpieces without years of intensive training. Yet here was this small girl, dressed in clothes that suggested her family had very little money, playing music that most of his advanced students couldn't master after months of practice. Dr. Harrison tried to make sense of what he was seeing. Perhaps this was the daughter of a famous pianist, someone who had been taught from infancy by world-class instructors. But something about the girl's appearance and demeanor suggested otherwise. She had the unself-conscious presence of a child who wasn't used to performing for others, who was simply lost in the joy of making music. The girl began playing Rachmaninoff's Prelude in C-Acca Minor, one of the most technically demanding pieces in the classical repertoire. Dr. Harrison's jaw dropped. He had heard this piece butchered by countless students who thought they were ready for its challenges. But this child was playing it with the technical precision and emotional understanding of a concert pianist. As she played, Dr. Harrison noticed something even more remarkable. The girl wasn't just mechanically reproducing music she had memorized. She was making subtle interpretive choices, adding her own emotional coloring to phrases, adjusting tempo and dynamics in ways that showed true musical intelligence. This wasn't the result of rote learning or drilling scales for hours. This was natural, intuitive musicianship of the highest order. Dr. Harrison realized he was witnessing something that might happen once in a generation, if that. This wasn't just talent. This was genius in its purest form. The kind of raw musical ability that teachers dream of finding, but rarely encounter in their entire careers. The girl finished the Rachmaninoff and sat quietly for a moment, her hands resting gently on the keys. Dr. Harrison could see her profile from where he stood, and he noticed that she was smiling slightly, as if she had just finished having a pleasant conversation with an old friend. Then she noticed him. The girl turned toward the door and saw Dr. Harrison standing there. Her eyes went wide with shock and fear. The confident, graceful musician disappeared instantly, replaced by a frightened child who had clearly been caught doing something she wasn't supposed to do. "Oh, no," she whispered, her voice barely audible, in the large hall. "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to. I wasn't supposed to." She scrambled to get up from the piano bench, nearly falling in her haste. Her face had gone pale, and Dr. Harrison could see that she was close to tears. "Please don't tell my mom," the girl pleaded, her voice shaking. "She works so hard, and she'll be in trouble if you're mad. I heard the music so many times, and I wanted to try. I'm sorry I touched your piano." Dr. Harrison's heart broke a little at the fear in her voice. This child thought she was in terrible trouble, when in reality she had just given him the most extraordinary musical experience of his professional life. "Wait," Dr. Harrison said gently, stepping into the hall with his hands raised in a calming gesture. "You're not in trouble. I'm not angry." The girl looked uncertain, ready to bolt at the first sign of real anger. "What's your name?" Dr. Harrison asked, keeping his voice soft and reassuring. "Rosa," she answered quietly. "My mom is Elena. She cleans here. I wait for her to finish work." Dr. Harrison nodded, pieces of the puzzle falling into place. Elena's daughter. The quiet little girl he had occasionally seen doing homework in the lobby. He had never imagined... "Rosa," Dr. Harrison said carefully. "What you just played was absolutely beautiful. Where did you learn those pieces?" Rosa looked confused by the question. I watch through the windows. When the students practice. I've been watching for 2 years." "You learned all of that just by watching?" Dr. Harrison couldn't hide his amazement. Rosa nodded, still looking worried that she might be in trouble, despite his reassurances. Rosa, I need you to understand something very important, Dr. Harrison said, moving closer but not wanting to frighten her. What you just did is extraordinary. Most people study piano for many years before they can play even one of those pieces. You played several of them perfectly. Really? Rosa's voice was small and uncertain. Really? Dr. Harrison confirmed. Rosa, would you be willing to play one more piece for me? Whatever you'd like to play. Rosa hesitated, then nodded. She climbed back onto the piano bench and placed her hands on the keys. This time she played Bach's Prelude in C major, her small fingers dancing through the arpeggiated passages with crystalline clarity. The piece filled the hall with light and joy, and Dr. Harrison found himself smiling despite his shock. As Rosa played, Dr. Harrison heard footsteps in the hallway. Elena appeared in the doorway, carrying a mop and looking frazzled from dealing with the water damage. "Rosa!" Elena called out sharply. "What are you doing? Get away from there right now!" Elena rushed toward the stage, her face a mixture of embarrassment and panic. "I'm so sorry, Dr. Harrison. I told her to stay in the lobby. She knows better than this." Dr. Harrison held up his hand to stop Elena's apologies. "Elena, please, we need to talk." Elena stood frozen in the doorway of the recital hall, her cleaning supplies forgotten as she watched her daughter sitting at the grand piano. The sound that had been filling the building moments ago was beautiful beyond anything she had ever heard, but seeing Rosa at that expensive instrument made her stomach twist with worry. "Rosa, get down from there immediately," Elena said, her voice sharper than she intended. She was mortified. Dr. Harrison, the most important person at the conservatory, was standing right there watching this disaster unfold. Elena could already imagine losing her job, the job that put food on their table and kept their small apartment. But Dr. Harrison wasn't angry. In fact, he looked more amazed than upset, which confused Elena even more. "Elena, please wait," Dr. Harrison said gently. "Before you take Rosa away, I need to tell you something extraordinary just happened here." Elena looked between Dr. Harrison and her daughter, not understanding. Rosa was climbing down from the piano bench, her face red with embarrassment and fear. "I'm so sorry, Dr. Harrison," Elena began, her words rushing together. "She knows she's not supposed to touch anything. She always does her homework quietly. I don't know what got into her tonight. It won't happen again, I promise." Dr. Harrison held up his hand to stop her apologies. "Elena, your daughter just played some of the most difficult pieces in classical piano literature. And she played them perfectly." Elena stared at him, certain she had misheard. "That's impossible. Rosa has never had a piano lesson in her life. We can't afford... she doesn't know how to play piano." "I thought the same thing," Dr. Harrison said. "But I just heard her play Chopin, Mozart, Beethoven, and Rachmaninoff. Not simple pieces, Elena. Advanced compositions that most of my college students struggle with." Elena looked at Rosa, who was standing quietly beside the piano, still looking like she expected to be in serious trouble. "Rosa, is this true? Were you really playing music?" Rosa nodded quietly. "I'm sorry." "Mama, I just wanted to try." "I've been watching the students for so long, and I think I remember some of the songs." "Some of the songs?" Dr. Harrison repeated, his voice filled with wonder. "Rosa, those weren't simple songs. Those were some of the greatest pieces ever written for piano." Elena felt overwhelmed. This couldn't be real. Her daughter, who did her homework at the kitchen table every night and watched cartoons on their old television, couldn't possibly be some kind of musical genius. Things like that didn't happen to families like theirs, Dr. Harrison seemed to understand Elena's confusion. I know this is a lot to process. Would it be okay if I made a phone call? There's someone I'd like to have listened to Rosa play, someone who can help us understand what we're dealing with here. Elena nodded numbly, still trying to make sense of everything. Dr. Harrison pulled out his phone and dialed a number. Catherine, I know it's late, but I need you to come to the conservatory right now. I've found someone that you need to hear. He paused, listening. Trust me, Catherine. This is important. More important than anything else you have planned tonight. While they waited, Dr. Harrison asked Rosa to play something else. Rosa chose a piece by Debussy, her small hands creating sounds that seemed to float through the air like whispers. Elena watched in amazement as her daughter's fingers moved across the keys with confidence and grace she had never seen before. 15 minutes later, Professor Catherine Webb arrived at the conservatory. Catherine was one of the most respected piano instructors in the city, a woman who had trained concert pianists and competition winners. She was known for her high standards and her ability to spot real talent. Ben, this better be good, Catherine said as she entered the recital hall. I was in the middle of grading final exams. She stopped when she saw Rosa sitting at the piano. Who's this little one? This is Rosa, Dr. Harrison said. She's 8 years old and she's never had a piano lesson. Rosa, would you play something for Professor Webb? Catherine looked skeptical. She had heard claims about child prodigies before, and most of the time they turned out to be children who had been drilled endlessly by pushy parents, producing mechanical performances without real musical understanding. Rosa began playing Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major. From the very first notes, Catherine's expression changed completely. She moved closer to the piano, her trained ear picking up subtleties that most people would miss. The child wasn't just playing the notes correctly. She was interpreting the music with remarkable maturity and sensitivity. How long has she been studying? Catherine whispered to Dr. Harrison. She hasn't, Dr. Harrison whispered back. She learned everything by watching students practice through the glass doors while her mother cleans the building. Catherine's eyes widened. She had been teaching piano for 30 years, and what she was hearing was impossible according to everything. She knew about musical education. Yet here was this little girl, playing with technique and musical understanding that typically took a decade or more to develop. When Rosa finished the nocturne, Catherine approached the piano bench. Rosa, that was beautiful. Can you play something else? Maybe something a little more challenging? Rosa thought for a moment, then began playing Liszt's Liebestraum No. 3, one of the most technically demanding pieces in the Romantic repertoire. Catherine felt her breath catch as Rosa's small hands navigated the complex passages with ease, bringing out the singing melody line while maintaining perfect control of the accompaniment. "This is extraordinary," Catherine murmured to Dr. Harrison. "I've never seen anything like this. The child has perfect pitch, incredible technical ability, and musical instincts that are they're beyond explanation." Elena overheard and felt a mix of pride and fear. "What does this mean? Is Rosa in trouble for using the piano?" "Trouble?" Catherine laughed. "Elena, your daughter may be one of the most gifted musicians I've ever encountered. This isn't trouble. This is a miracle." Word of Rosa's incredible performance spread quickly through Dr. Harrison's network of musicians and educators. By the next evening, the conservatory had received calls from local music teachers, newspaper reporters, and even representatives from a classical music radio station. Dr. Harrison decided to arrange a small, informal gathering for Friday evening. He invited a carefully selected group of respected musicians and teachers to hear Rosa play. He wanted expert opinions on what they were dealing with and how best to nurture Rosa's extraordinary gift. Friday evening arrived, and the recital hall filled with some of the most accomplished musicians in the city. There was Professor James Chen, the symphony orchestra's principal pianist, Rebecca Martinez, who had won international piano competitions and now taught at the university. David Thompson, a composer whose works were performed worldwide. These were people who understood music at the highest levels. Elena felt nervous as she and Rosa entered the hall filled with all these important-looking people. Rosa seemed less nervous than her mother, perhaps because she didn't fully understand how unusual her situation was. Dr. Harrison introduced Rosa to the assembled group, explaining that she had never received formal training and had learned everything through observation. Some of the musicians looked skeptical until Rosa began to play. She started with Bach's Goldberg Variations, a piece so complex that most pianists spend years mastering it. Rosa played with clarity and expression that brought tears to several listeners' eyes. She followed with Brahms' Rhapsody in B minor, her small hands somehow spanning chords that seemed impossible for someone her size. When Rosa finished, the room was completely silent for several long moments. Then Professor Chen began to clap, and soon the entire room erupted in applause. Several of the musicians were openly weeping, moved by what they had just witnessed. "I've been playing piano for 40 years, Rebecca Martinez said, her voice shaking with emotion. "I've never heard anything like what this child just did. It's not just the technical skill, it's the musical intelligence, the emotional depth. This is beyond prodigy level. This is something that happens once in a generation, if we're lucky." David Thompson nodded in agreement. "The child doesn't just play the notes. She understands the language of music intuitively. She's having conversations with the composers across centuries. It's profound." Elena listened to these experts praise her daughter and felt overwhelmed. Part of her was proud beyond words, but another part was frightened. What did all this mean for Rosa's future? What did it mean for their simple life? Dr. Harrison addressed the group. "The question now is, how do we best support Rosa's development? She clearly needs proper training, but we also need to be careful not to overwhelm her or take away the natural joy she finds in music." Professor Catherine Webb stood up. "I would be honored to work with Rosa if her mother agrees, but this needs to be done carefully with respect for Rosa's childhood and her family's circumstances." Elena looked at Rosa, who was sitting quietly at the piano, still not fully understanding that she had just amazed some of the most accomplished musicians in the city. Her daughter looked happy and peaceful, the same way she always did when she listened to music. "What do you think, Rosa?" Elena asked. "Would you like to learn more about piano?" Rosa's face lit up with the biggest smile Elena had seen in months. "Really, Mama? I could learn to play even better?" That smile told Elena everything she needed to know about the decision ahead of them. The months following that magical Friday evening brought changes to Rosa and Elena's life that neither of them could have imagined. Within a week of the informal recital, Dr. Harrison had called an emergency meeting with the conservatory's board of directors. He showed them videos that Catherine Webb had taken of Rosa's performance, and the board was unanimous in their decision to create a full scholarship program specifically for Rosa. Elena sat in the conservatory's elegant conference room, feeling completely out of place among the well-dressed board members and their expensive briefcases. Her cleaning uniform had been replaced by her best dress, a simple navy blue outfit she usually wore to church. But she still felt like she didn't belong in this world of wealth and privilege. "We want to make sure Rosa gets the best possible. Musical education," explained Mrs. Patricia Langford, the board chairwoman. "But we also understand that your family's financial situation needs to be considered." Dr. Harrison leaned forward across the polished table. "Elena, we're not just talking about free lessons for Rosa. We're proposing a complete support system. The conservatory will cover all of Rosa's musical education, including private lessons with Catherine, music theory classes, and eventually preparation for competitions and performances." Elena felt her head spinning. "That sounds wonderful, but I don't understand why you would do all this for us. We're nobody special." Catherine Webb, who had become Rosa's unofficial advocate, smiled warmly. "Elena, what your daughter can do is incredibly rare. We've all seen talented children before, but Rosa is different. She has the kind of natural ability that comes along maybe once in a lifetime. It would be a tragedy not to nurture that gift." The board also offered Elena a new position at the conservatory. Instead of night cleaning, she would work as a day custodian with better hours and higher pay. This meant Rosa could attend her lessons after school, and Elena could be there to support her. Elena looked around the room at all these important people who wanted to help her daughter, and she felt tears forming in her eyes. "I don't know what to say. This is like a dream." "Say yes, Mama," came a small voice from the corner. Rosa had been sitting quietly in a chair, listening to the adults discuss her future. "I want to learn more songs." Elena laughed through her tears. "Okay, baby, we'll say yes." Rosa's lessons with Catherine began the following Monday. Catherine had taught many students over the years, but working with Rosa was unlike anything she had ever experienced. The child absorbed musical concepts like a sponge soaking up water. Techniques that typically took months to master, Rosa learned in days. "It's almost like she already knows this stuff somewhere deep inside," Catherine explained to Dr. Harrison after Rosa's first formal lesson. "I start to teach her about musical phrasing, and she's already doing it instinctively. I show her proper hand position, and her hands naturally fall into perfect form." But Catherine was careful not to push too hard. Rosa was still 8 years old, and Catherine knew that maintaining the child's love of music was more important than rushing her development. They kept lessons to 1 hour, 3 times a week, with plenty of time for Rosa to just play and explore on her own. Rosa thrived under Catherine's guidance. She learned to read music, though she rarely needed to look at the sheet music once she had heard a piece. She studied music theory and discovered why certain combinations of notes sounded beautiful. Together, she learned about the great composers and the stories behind their music. 6 months into her studies, Catherine felt Rosa was ready for something special. She had entered Rosa in the annual Young Artists Piano Competition, a prestigious event that typically featured teenagers who had been studying for years. Elena was nervous about the competition. "Are you sure she's ready for this? She's so much younger than the other kids," Catherine reassured her. "Rosa won't just be ready, she's going to amaze everyone there. But more importantly, this will be good experience for her. She needs to learn how to perform in front of larger audiences." The competition was held at the city's main concert hall, a grand venue with over 1,000 seats. Elena had never been inside such an elegant building. The lobby was filled with nervous teenagers warming up on practice pianos, their parents hovering nearby with sheet music and water bottles. Rosa seemed completely calm among all the pre-performance anxiety. She sat quietly with Elena, occasionally, humming to herself and watching the other young musicians prepare. "Aren't you nervous, baby?" Elena asked. Rosa thought about this seriously. "A little bit. But the piano is my friend. When I sit down to play, it feels like coming home." When Rosa's turn came, she walked onto the stage wearing a simple white dress that the conservatory had provided. She looked tiny behind the massive concert grand piano, her feet barely reaching the pedals. The audience, filled mostly with parents, and music teachers, seemed surprised to see such a young competitor. Rosa had chosen to play Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor, one of the most challenging pieces in the Romantic repertoire. It was a bold choice for someone her age, a piece that demanded not just technical skill, but deep emotional maturity. From the moment Rosa's fingers touched the keys, the entire hall fell silent. The music that poured forth was breathtaking in its beauty and sophistication. Rosa played with the confidence of a seasoned performer, her small hands somehow managing the enormous technical demands while bringing out every subtle emotion in the music. The piece tells a story, moving from gentle, questioning melodies to passionate, dramatic climaxes, and Rosa understood every chapter of that story. She made the piano sing during the lyrical passages and thunder during the powerful sections. The audience sat transfixed, many with tears streaming down their faces. When Rosa finished, the silence stretched for several heartbeats. Then the entire hall erupted in the most enthusiastic applause Elena had ever heard. People jumped to their feet, shouting, "Bravo!" and "Magnificent!" Some of the other young competitors were applauding as enthusiastically as their parents, recognizing that they had just witnessed something extraordinary. Rosa won first place unanimously, but more than that, her performance was recorded by someone in the audience and shared on social media. Within days, the video had been viewed millions of times. News stations picked up the story, and suddenly, Rosa became known as the little girl who amazed the world. The attention was overwhelming at first. Reporters wanted interviews, agents called with offers, and the conservatory's phone rang constantly. Elena felt protective of Rosa and worried about all the pressure, but Dr. Harrison and Catherine helped filter the requests and make sure Rosa's childhood remained as normal as possible. A year later, Rosa was invited to perform with the city symphony orchestra. Elena sat in the front row of the concert hall, wearing a new dress that the conservatory had helped her pick out. She watched her daughter walk onto the stage where world-famous musicians performed, looking confident and happy. Rosa was going to play Mozart's Piano Concerto No. 21, with the full orchestra accompanying her. As the familiar melody began, Elena thought back to that evening when she had found Rosa at the piano for the first time. She remembered how frightened she had been, how certain she was that Rosa was in terrible trouble. Now, watching her daughter perform with grace and joy in front of an audience of 2,000 people, Elena understood that Rosa had never been in trouble that night. She had been discovering who she was meant to be. The orchestra followed Rosa's lead as she guided them through the beautiful concerto. When she reached the famous slow movement, the entire hall seemed to hold its breath. Rosa's interpretation was so moving, so full of wisdom and beauty, that people forgot they were listening to a 9-year-old child. They were simply lost in the magic of the music. When the final notes faded away, the audience leaped to their feet in the longest standing ovation in the symphony's history. Rosa stood and took her bow, then looked out into the audience until she found her mother. She smiled and waved, and Elena waved back, her face wet with happy tears. After the concert, as they walked to the car together, Rosa slipped her hand into Elena's. Mama, do you remember when you used to tell me that if I worked hard and was kind to people, good things would happen? Elena nodded, remembering the countless times she had said those words, usually when money was tight and things seemed hopeless. I think the piano was the good thing that was waiting for me, Rosa said simply. Elena squeezed her daughter's hand and smiled. Sometimes good things came in ways you never expected, from moments when you thought you were in trouble, but were actually finding exactly what you had been looking for all along. The conservatory had installed a small plaque near the grand piano in the recital hall. It read, "In this room, Rosa discovered that music lives not in the keys, but in the heart that touches them." Every evening, other children now came to the conservatory with their parents. They sat in the same lobby where Rosa used to do her homework, watching students practice through glass doors, their eyes bright with dreams and possibility. Because Rosa's story had taught everyone an important lesson. You never know where genius might be hiding, waiting quietly for its moment to shine.